In recognition of the weakness of human nature and the little power that the universal moral feeling exercises over most hearts, Providence has placed such helpful drives in us as supplements for virtue, which move some to beautiful actions even without principles, while at the same time being able to give others, who are ruled by these principles, a greater impetus and a stronger impulse thereto. Sympathy and complacence are grounds for beautiful actions that would perhaps all be suffocated by the preponderance of a cruder self-interest, but as we have seen, they are not immediate grounds of virtue, although, since they are ennobled by their kinship with it, they also bear its name. Hence I can call them adopted virtues, but that which rests on principles, genuine virtue. The former are beautiful and charming, the latter alone is sublime and worthy of honor. One calls a mind in which the former sentiments rule a good heart, and people of that sort good-hearted. But one rightly ascribes a noble heart to one who is virtuous from principles, calling him alone a righteous person. These adopted virtues nevertheless have a great similarity to the true virtues, since they contain the feeling of an immediate pleasure in kindly and benevolent actions. The good-hearted person will without any ulterior aim, and from immediate complacence, conduct himself peaceably and courteously with you and feel sincere compassion for the need of another. Immanuel Kant. What makes a good person? The answer seems easy. The answer seems to be that a good person is he who does good actions, good deeds. And what that would mean, what that would entail, I've already discussed in 3 previous lectures on the categorical imperative, on the moral law, on human dignity, on the kingdom of purposes, because the categorical imperative, according to Kant, is the law, the moral law that we give ourselves through our own reason, through our own autonomy. And the categorical imperative is the law according to which we should act. However, it is not the actions as such that make a good person, if you think about it. An action could be in accordance with the law, so it could be the right action, but it could still be done for the wrong reasons. For example, to be sure, the moral law tells you not to murder. But maybe you don't murder somebody because you really follow the moral law and because you genuinely have reverence for that person's dignity, for that person's humanity, and therefore don't want to harm him. Or you would very much like to murder that person, and the only reason why you don't is because you're afraid of getting caught and going to jail. Clearly, in both cases, you are doing the same action, the action which is dictated by the moral law, but you are doing it for very different reasons. And in the second case, you are just refraining from murder for selfish reasons, but you would do it if you thought that you could get away with it. So clearly, you are not a good person. So therefore, when moral philosophy answers the question, what should we do? Which, again, Kant does with the categorical imperative, it has not yet answered the question, what makes us a good person? So that is what I want to deal with here now. And Kant says that we can call, or we do call, a human being a good person in 3 different regards. Because to Kant, the human being has three natures. I will address that in more detail in another lecture when I get to Kant's anthropology, when I get to Kant, to what he says about the human being and human nature. But for now, I can be brief. For now, it's enough to just say that we have a sensual and animal nature. We have a spiritual and intellectual nature. And in the middle, we have a mix because we are intellectual animals. And because of us having these three natures, we can also be good, or we can do good things, or refrain from doing bad things in three different ways. Kant says we can be good-natured, good-hearted, or of good character. And I will say right away that to him, only the last, the good character, which corresponds to our intellectual nature, has actual moral worth. The other two don't. But the good character, or rather what character is in general, I want to address on my next lecture. Here in this lecture, I want to deal with the first two, and I want to explain why they ultimately don't make you a morally good person. So let's start with the first, being good-natured. At first, I want to say that this is a bit difficult for me to translate. What Kant says here in German is gutes Gemüt. Now, the word Gemüt has two components. One of it is, so the part Müd, is cognate with the English word mood. And the first part of the word, G, this in German often signifies a sum or a collective of something. So, for example, take the word Bein, which is cognate with the English bone. And then a word for skeleton is Gebeine. So, the collection of the bones, right? Or take the word Berg, which means mountain. And then a mountain range is Gebirge, so several mountains together. So in that sense, the Gemüt is the sum or the collective of our moods. It's often translated as mind, I think, but mind is more about what we are thinking. It's more intellectual, right? While the Gemüt is actually more about what we are feeling. It's more emotional. We have a corresponding adjective, which is gutmütig, so having a good Gemüt. And this adjective gutmütig means more or less the same as the English being good-natured, or also being docile. So this is basically what Kant means. So I don't quite like the translation good-natured. It has the same sense, more or less, as German gutmütig. But Kant wouldn't say it's about the nature, because while this is part of our nature, this is not our whole nature. He would say that the good heart is also part of our nature. But anyways, the English language, at least as far as I can think of, doesn't have a better word for it. So I will have to go with being good-natured. What Kant says about this is that it is about being good in a negative sense. So he who is good-natured or docile will not harm others. He will not easily be angered. He will not be very aggressive. Even if he does get angry, it will not last long. He will not be vengeful. He will not harbor resentments for long. And the good-natured person will be rather tolerant of others and let others do their thing. And this, Kant says, is indeed probably the main reason for people being good at all. So Kant does not have the best opinion of most people when it comes to their morality. You often find Kant criticized nowadays for having a too high opinion of human beings. You hear people say, "Oh, this morality of Kant's, it's too much. He expects too much. Human beings are not that good." But they don't understand that Kant is not saying, when he describes what morality is, he's not saying that human beings are like this. Like, maybe there's no one who can reach Kant's standards of morality. He's just saying how they should be. And the should is not affected by the are. But as for how humans actually are, Kant doesn't have the best opinion of most, and he says that most people are good in the negative sense, that is, not doing evil, not causing harm, but not out of principles, not out of actual morality, but rather out of weakness. Simply because they don't have any strong drives to do evil. Which reminds you of Nietzsche and his critique of slave morality. There's this famous passage or parable in Nietzsche of the lambs and the predatory birds. And the birds come again and again and steal away a lamb to eat it. And so the lambs say, "Oh, those birds, they are evil. They're evil predators, while we, the lambs who only eat grass, who don't harm anybody, we are the good ones." And of course, the lambs are indeed not harming anybody, but not because they are so morally good, but just because they are lambs. That's just in their nature. They just happen to be that way. And they happen to be too weak and to have no strong drives to harm anyone. But they are deluding themselves and being self-righteous if they think that this is something they should be praised and applauded for. If they were predatory birds, they too would probably kill and eat lambs and not be vegetarian. So this is also why Kant says that having a good Gemüt, so being good-natured, being docile, while it makes one, let's say, a harmless person, a person that is more easy to be around with, a person that is more easy to deal with, rather than somebody who has a bad Gemüt, who is easily agitated, it is without moral value because it is just our nature. It is not something we decided for ourselves to be that way. It just so happens that we have a nature that makes us more harmless. Also, what Kant criticizes here, not just is not your own merit, but rather it doesn't lead to moral actions necessarily, even. Because one problem is that he who has a good Gemüt, he who is good-natured, he lets everything and everyone be, and he tolerates everything and everyone, meaning he doesn't just tolerate the good, he also tolerates the evil. Kant says that it is easy for a tyrant um, to to rule over a nation of good-natured people. They would not stand up. They would be like docile cattle, and they would just let it be. Here you may think of Hannah Arendt and the banality of evil that she described. Someone like Eichmann probably was good-natured, had no real evil drives of his own, but he just did what he was told. He just followed his orders without thinking much. And if you have a nation of Eichmanns, then a few Hitlers are enough to commit terrible crimes. Or likewise, for a smaller scale example, imagine a school class, and imagine there's bullying going on. If there's a student in the class, or maybe many students who are good-natured, who are friendly, they will probably not be the ones starting and leading the bullying, but they will also not be the ones standing up for the victim of the bullying. They will let it happen. And as we should all know, the evil in the world, it is enough for there to be a few actively evil people, and just a lot of people who are bystanders, and to let it happen. And therefore, to say that people just should be good-natured, just should be docile, to make that the moral demand, would be demanding that people should be like a herd of sheep, and that would be a good thing. And for one more criticism, Kant even says that the good-natured person, he will not just let evil happen and not stand up against it. He can even be made to commit evil himself, because the good-natured person, Kant says, he is like wax. He is easily influenced and formed and shaped by others. So while he may not have his own genuine drives for evil, what he does have is wanting to not get into others' way, wanting to not fight with them, wanting maybe to be liked by them, to please them. And therefore, others who have a bad influence on the good-natured person can get him into all sorts of vices, Kant says. Think of someone having a bad influence, or being influenced badly, falling in with the wrong people. Think of youth trying to please their peers, and therefore starting to drink or do drugs, or starting to steal or whatever, not because they really would do it on their own, but because they are pushed into it and they want to please. We could go back to the example of the bullying. The good-natured person would probably not start the bullying in the class, but not only would he not stand up against it, if a popular kid is bullying someone else and everyone is joining in, the good-natured person might also join in without thinking much about it. Kant gives a concrete example, and that is the Roman Emperor Nero, who has often in the past been held up as one of the villains of history, especially from the Christian perspective. And Kant says that Nero was not a villain because he really had evil drives. Kant says that by his nature he was good-natured, he had a good Gemüt, but he was a weak person, and he was someone who wanted to be liked and to please, and that made him get into lust, get into cruelty, and turn evil. So that is why this good Gemüt, is not what really makes a moral person to Kant. Which leads us to the second regard, in which we might call a human being good, and which is also what I mostly want to talk about here in this lecture, and that is the good heart. The good heart, Kant says, is positively good. So while the good Gemüt, being docile, just won't actively harm others, the good heart will actually help others. Having a good heart, according to Kant, means feeling with others. And feeling with others, to him, has two components. Feeling their pain, compassion, and also feeling their joy, which I think is a nice thought. And in German, we have the word Mitleid for compassion. So Mitleid literally means suffering with someone. So Leid is suffering, and mit just means with, which is also basically what the word compassion means, right? Compassion comes from Latin, and passion also means the suffering, or Leid in German, and con means with, together, like the German mit. And then in German we also have the word Mitgefühl. Gefühl is feeling, and again, mit is with, so feeling with somebody. And in the regular everyday language, Mitleid and Mitgefühl are often used as synonyms. But to Kant, Mitgefühl is sort of an umbrella term, which includes Mitleid. So feeling with others includes compassion, feeling their suffering, but it also includes what he calls Mitfreude. And Mitfreude is not a normal German word, unlike the other two, which Kant didn't make up, which are regular words that everyone uses. But Mitfreude is not a word you usually hear. But Freude means joy. So having joy with someone, as opposed to Mitleid, suffering with someone. And again, Kant says that both together constitute Mitgefühl, feeling with someone. While Mitleid translates to compassion, I'm not really aware of there being a proper English word that would translate Mitfreude, having joy with somebody else. It is, however, something you will find in some ethics, like in Buddhist ethic, for example, where you have karuna, which is the compassion, caring for someone who is suffering, who is in pain, and where you have mudita, which is exactly what Kant calls Mitfreude, so being happy for somebody else. And as Kant says, you can have compassion only with the weak, only with those in pain. You cannot feel compassion with the strong ones, with those who are well off, but you can still feel this Mitfreude, this joy for their happiness with them. Kant would also say that the umbrella term, Mitgefühl, feeling with others, is could also be described as taking part in their fate and whatever happens to them. The German word here is Anteilnahme or Teilnehmung. Teil meaning part, nehmen meaning to take. So take a part, take a share in what they are feeling. And this Teilnehmung, this taking part with others, this is very important to Kant. I made a lecture about Kant's sympathetic method, and in that lecture I explained that sympathetic is not the best translation, probably, because in German it's teilnehmende Methode. It's a method that is about taking part together with others, not just disregarding their opinions as wrong, but rather taking part together with them in the, well, in the grand quest for finding the truth. But Kant would stress that while feeling with others is a form of taking part, it is not the only form of taking part in others' fate, in what happens to others. Because you can take part in their fate because of your feeling when you are good-hearted. But you can also take part in their fate because of you thinking and reflecting about it. If you have a good character. Both will lead to similar actions, to helping others who are in need, but the actions will have a different source. And that to me is very important to stress, because nowadays you often get these nihilistic cynics who, when you talk about morality, will say, oh, there is no such thing as morality, it's every person for himself, and we are all selfish, that's just evolution, everyone is out for himself. And those people who talk about morality, they are just deluding themselves, or they are just faking it, they are as selfish as everybody else. And then they will usually point out, oh, you self-proclaimed moral people, you don't really have compassion with everyone. You don't really care for all the homeless people that are right now out there on the street freezing, maybe, or you don't really care for all the poor children in the world starving. You don't really care for all the people dying in wars right now, being bombed or shot right now. And the thing is, they are right if we just look at compassion. So if we just look at a form of partaking that is based on feelings, because we cannot possibly feel for everyone, for all 8 billion people. We may feel for what we see. So if I see a specific starving kid, or a specific kid being bombed and burned alive in war, I may feel bad at that suffering. But the abstract knowledge that right now there are so many people being killed, starving, freezing, whatever, doesn't cause me an immense heartache. Which is not a bad thing, Kant would say. Because what use is there? If we really had compassion, if we really felt bad for 8 billion people, for everyone who's suffering on Earth, there's so much suffering, we could never stop crying. Crying would not even be enough. We would probably go mad from feeling all the suffering. So there is no point in that. But the cynics are wrong when they say, oh, you don't have compassion with everyone, so you are not really moral, you don't really care, because there is also another form of care. There's an intellectual care. I cannot be affected, I cannot feel bad at the abstract knowledge that some people are suffering, but at the same time, I can still intellectually, in my judgment, very, very strongly reject that they are suffering. and make the moral judgment that this shouldn't be, that this should be changed. And I can act on that judgment. I can make myself act on that judgment, even if there's no feeling of compassion, of feeling their suffering, that compels me to act in that way. So that is very important, because this distinction of Kant's, because otherwise those cynics would be right. Um, of course, what those cynics are saying, it's just a rationalization for themselves. It's just to silence their own conscience, because they are telling themselves, okay, I might be an egoistical asshole, but it's okay because everyone secretly is an egoistical asshole. So I'm really not worse than other people. In fact, I'm even better because at least I'm an honest asshole, while those who seem to be moral, they are hypocritical on top of being egoistical. So they are really worse than me, even. That's what those people are telling themselves, to be able to sleep at night. But again, it's not true. It's only true if compassion, if actually feeling others' suffering, is your only source of morality. But it doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't. We can have an intellectual insight into what should happen, what should be done. And if those cynics have that insight and still don't act accordingly because they don't have a corresponding feeling, then they act contrary to their own insight, and that precisely is what makes them guilty. But anyways, being good-hearted means partaking in others' fate, but not for intellectual reasons, not because you have thought about that this is what you should do, but rather because you feel with them, feel both their joy and their suffering. And this makes you humane, Kant says, which to him is the opposite of cruelty. So if you had an evil heart, you would be cruel. You would enjoy others' suffering, while when you have a good heart, you are humane. You are happy for their joy, and you feel pain at their suffering, and hence you want to bring them joy, and you want to end their suffering. And the explanation for the word humaneness is not always completely consistent within Kant's writings and lectures, because at some point he says, we call this humaneness because this type of goodness is what is specifically human. Because the first type, the good gemüt, so being good-natured, being docile, that is something you also find in many animals, like cows or sheep. They are also not particularly aggressive or harmful to anyone. And then the third type of goodness, being good for intellectual reasons, being good based on your own principles, having a good character, that you would also find in a pure rational being, that you would also find in God. But this humaneness, this good heart, you find only in a mixed being like the human being, because it's based on the one hand on a feeling, so on us being sensual beings, being beings capable of suffering ourselves, of feeling pain. But on the other hand, it's also based on a sort of reflection on us being able to sink ourselves, so to say, into another's stead, into another's shoes, and think how that other person would feel, or how we would feel in that other's stead. And that's, Kant says, why we can call this quality or this supposed virtue humaneness. However, in contradiction with that, there's other passages where he says that being good-hearted and being compassionate and helping others based on mere feeling is something that can also be found in some animals. But if that's the case, if that's what Kant is thinking, then I don't see why it would be justified to call this humaneness in particular, because then it would not be a specifically human quality. But be that as it may, this good-heartedness is, I would say, what most people nowadays understand by morality. We live in an age that, if it cares about morality at all, is obsessed with empathy. That seems to be like the most fashionable moral word nowadays that is thrown around. You're always supposed to have empathy, to feel for others, to be compassionate. And while Kant does say that compassion or feeling with others is the most beautiful, the most noble of our affections, it is still in the end just an affection. It is still in the end just a feeling, and it doesn't really come from us. It's not something we chose, but rather it is just in our nature. And therefore, just like having a good Gemüt, so having a nature that doesn't actively harm anyone, having a nature that wants to help others is not really something that we can be praised for. It's not our own merit. And Kant would say that really, in the end, it's just a lucky coincidence, lucky for the other people around us, whom we may help out of our good-heartedness. There could also be an unlucky coincidence. We could have an evil heart and we could be cruel. And really, the good-hearted person and the cruel person, one is not morally better or worse than the other. Sure, their actions have better or worse consequences for other people, so other people might rather want to be around good-hearted than around evil-hearted, rather be around humane than inhumane and cruel people. But their inner moral value is really the same, because both are in the end selfish, because both are acting based on their own feelings and based on what brings them happiness. It so happens, if I'm good-hearted, that it brings me happiness to end others' suffering. And if I'm evil-hearted, it so happens that it brings me happiness to cause others' suffering. But both are just acting for their own happiness. The compassionate person is just helping somebody else because he himself feels bad when he sees that other person suffering. He wants to end that bad feeling by ending that other person's suffering. But if he were to meet a cruel person who felt happiness when he makes somebody else suffer, he could not really reproach that cruel person. He could not really say, you ought not to be that way. Because if he were to do that, he would already have left the morality of compassion. If he were to speak about an ought, if he were to say, okay, you might not feel compassion, but you should feel it, you ought to feel it, where does this ought come from? Clearly, it doesn't come from compassion. Because, again, that person does not have compassion yet. If I'm telling him, you ought to have it, you ought to, I don't know, cultivate it in yourself, clearly it's not compassion that can drive you to develop compassion, which you previously didn't have. So thereby we would already be admitting that morality needs to have some higher principle than compassion. So that's why, according to Kant, the good heart is also morally worthless. Kant complains about the morality of his time, which he thinks is too soft, too weak, too sentimental. Um, he criticizes, on the one hand, novelists of his day because they only want to uh, create in their readers feelings of compassion, of generosity, of love for humankind. And he also criticizes the priests, the preachers of his day, uh, because they, as Kant says, they are degrading the dignity of religion by not preaching about the duties people have to be moral, um, to act with conscience, but rather by only stressing how the poor are suffering and starving, and by only trying to steer people's emotions, to make them cry, to make them have compassion and act out of the goodness of their heart. And Kant criticizes this. Kant, again and again in his writings and in his lectures to his young students, he warns of soft-heartedness, which is the fake compassion and the fashionable panacea and consolation of the heart of our moralists. But it is a kind of opium which creates a dreamed up well being and in the end makes the heart limp. Nothing is more opposed to all character. One has to bend the stiff neck under the yoke of duty. There is no virtue but in the valiant heart, and no valiant heart without the power of principles. And this gives me an opportunity once again to address the harmony between a lot of what Kant says and a lot of what Nietzsche says. I've said before, I get asked sometimes, oh, how can you like both Kant and Nietzsche? Aren't they so opposed? Aren't they in contradiction with each other? Isn't Kant stressing the importance of morality and moral duty so much, and Nietzsche is criticizing morality? Well, I agree that the cliches of Kant and Nietzsche are very much opposed to each other. And you cannot be a Kantian and a Nietzschean um, in the sense these words have in the minds of most people at the same time. I agree with that. But if you actually read them, it's a different picture. Then you would find that Nietzsche criticizes not all morality, but rather specifically slave morality, which is about compassion. Just consider some of Nietzsche's writings. He says, for example, the noble man honors in himself the powerful one, him also who has power over himself, who knows how to speak and how to keep silence, who takes pleasure in subjecting himself to severity and hardness, and has reverence for all that is severe and hard. Wotan placed the hard heart in my breast, says an old Scandinavian saga. It is thus rightly expressed from the soul of a proud Viking. Such a type of man is even proud of not being made for sympathy. The hero of the saga therefore adds warningly, he who has not a hard heart when young will never have one. The noble and brave who think thus are the furthest removed from the morality which sees precisely in sympathy, or in acting for the good of others, or in désintéressement, the characteristic of the moral. Faith in oneself, pride in oneself, a radical enmity and irony towards selflessness belong as definitely to noble morality as do a careless scorn and precaution in presence of sympathy and the warm heart. It is the powerful who know how to honor. It is their art, their domain for invention. And in another passage, Nietzsche says, "A man who says, 'I like that, I take it for my own and mean to guard and protect it from everyone,' a man who can conduct a case, carry out a resolution, remain true to an opinion, keep hold of a woman, punish and overthrow insolence, a man who has his indignation and his sword, and to whom the weak, the suffering, the oppressed, and even the animals willingly submit and naturally belong. In short, a man who is a master by nature. And such a man has sympathy well. That sympathy has value. But of what account is the sympathy of those who suffer? Of those even who preach sympathy? There is nowadays, throughout almost the whole of Europe, a sickly irritability and sensitiveness towards pain, and also a repulsive irrestrainableness in complaining and effeminizing, which, with the aid of religion and philosophical nonsense, seeks to deck itself out as something superior. There is a regular cult of suffering. The unmanliness of that which is called sympathy by such groups of visionaries is always, I believe, the first thing that strikes the eye. One must resolutely and radically taboo this latest form of bad taste. And finally, I wish people to put the good amulet Gay Saber, gay signs in ordinary language, on heart and neck as a protection against it. I think you can get a sense here that Kant and Nietzsche are much more in agreement than is usually thought. It is Schopenhauer who forms the bridge between those two. Schopenhauer, who has the audacity to consider himself the only one true Kantian, it is Schopenhauer who is in disagreement with them both, who is a proponent of a weak, soft, animal-like compassion and rejects all true morality. But as for Kant, not only is the compassion morally worthless to him because it ultimately just comes out of our nature, not our own will, it ultimately is just a form of selfishness. No, he even believes that for several reasons, compassion and basing morality on compassion is quite dangerous. For one, very often compassion actually doesn't lead to good actions. It only leads to whining and complaining and feeling bad. So people who are overly compassionate may cry many tears for the suffering of other humans, but precisely that may actually make them incapable of actually acting and actually doing something good in the world. And sometimes it's those who are the most compassionate, the most good-hearted, who, when it comes to that, don't act morally. I think of friends I have whose mother, it's a Kurdish family, it's a nice, sweet Kurdish lady who's very friendly to everyone, who when I'm invited, she would always care for me as her guest. She would always insist on cooking and so on. And she is very compassionate. She will, when I come over, she will say things like, "Oh, I noted in the news that there's a war there, or there was an earthquake there. Oh, how terrible! All the poor people suffering, all the people dying. That makes me cry." But once one of her sons witnessed a robbery, like on the other side of the street, and she very strongly told him to not go and report to the police as a witness. These immigrant families, there's a lot of instinctive distrust for the police, and there's the belief that even if you have done nothing wrong, it's better to stay away from the police and not get in contact with it at all, which surely has its reasons and is not entirely unjustified, but still, the point is that for all her compassion, for all her feeling bad about people who are suffering, here she was trying to prevent her son from doing his moral duty. And in this, Kant is very untimely in his morality, because opposed to what is preached nowadays in this age of the glorification of empathy, Kant would say, if someone is suffering and you can't help him in any possible way, then, even if it is your best friend, turn your back and walk away. Don't waste your time feeling bad. That way you are just doubling the suffering in the world. Nobody is helped. If there's one person suffering and now you too, as a second person, are suffering because of it, rather walk away, go somewhere where you can do something good and do actual good actions. And before someone will reject that as being too cold, being too rigid, and before someone might say, but can't you still console your friend at least? Why would you walk away and turn your back? Well, consoling would be doing something, right? Kant would not be opposed to that. Of course, there could be situations like, let's say, your best friend has a deadly illness and you can't cure him, but maybe you can be there at his deathbed to make it easier for him. That's of course okay. Kant is not against that. But if you really cannot possibly help someone, not even by, while not taking the actual suffering away, making them feel better about it, then Kant says there is no use in burdening yourself with it and making yourself suffer, torturing yourself with it, but rather then you should walk away. A second issue of compassion is that not only does it not necessarily lead to good actions, it can also lead to a sort of self-righteousness, because people can confuse their own feelings of sympathy for others with actually being good. So they can tell themselves, oh, I'm so full of compassion, I'm suffering so much when I see others suffering, so I must be a good person. Even while they are probably not doing anything to help others who are suffering. And here Kant would say, no, it's not your inner feelings of compassion that make you good, but rather a truly good person will actually do good. He will actually try to improve the world. He will actually do something to change things for the better. And this I find is a very common problem. I find that nowadays, especially amongst humanistic, educated elite, like those people that I call ausklärt as opposed to aufklärt, so entwilighted as opposed to enlightened. The people who make up a lot of the, as I said, the elite, the sort of center left people, good Democrats, lots of teachers, journalists, that sort of milieu. I have the misfortune of myself being related to some such people who, as good Democrats, will be very worried about the rise of right-wing extremism, be it here in Germany, be it in the United States, who, as compassionate humanists, will feel bad about people suffering in war, or from starvation, from poverty, who may also, I don't know, donate some money sometimes. But ultimately, they don't want to reflect about their own part in this. They don't want to reflect about the fact that they themselves are part of the problem and that they themselves are what keeps the status quo as it is. And that they, and be it indirectly, be it just with their lifestyle, that they are causing the suffering which they might feel bad about. Like, I remember years ago, probably 10 years ago or so, my dad and we had a discussion with my uncle, who has been a teacher, has been the vice headmaster of his school, then went into the school bureaucracy, and in his state was the organizer of the statewide final exams, uh, which is a well paid job, and well paid enough to have his own house and everything. And in that discussion, it was about him being part of the upper 10%, and he would not accept that. He would completely reject it. He would say, no, no, I don't belong to the 10 richest percent. I'm middle class. Now, I think this is I don't know how bad it is in other nations, but I think it is a specifically German illness that everyone wants to be middle class, and everyone lies about being middle class or deludes himself about being middle class. It doesn't matter how rich you are. Like our now gun Chancellor Scholz, in some interview, he was asked about being rich, and he was like, "No, no, I'm not rich." Of course, you are rich if you're the federal chancellor of Germany. There is simply no way to not be rich, even if you just had the monthly income that you get as a chancellor. Uh, Even that is more than some people make in a year. And you probably don't have only that monthly income. You have lots of side incomes. So clearly he is rich. Maybe he's not a billionaire, to be sure. There are richer people, but he's still rich if he's chancellor. And likewise, our new chancellor, Merz, there's an infamous interview where he was asked what part of society he belongs to, and he said, well, I guess I'm upper middle class. The guy owns 2 private jets. He has his own airplanes, but he thinks he's upper middle class. I guess I must be only lower middle class because I don't own any airplanes. I don't even own a car. Um, so I don't know. This might be a specifically German thing that everyone wants to be middle class and no one wants to be rich. There's a sort of rejection of richness. But the point is that, of course, my uncle belongs to the upper 10%. The issue is just that people, when they hear upper 10%, they only think of the upper 1% or even 0.1%. Like they think of billionaires, and then my uncle probably thinks, oh, I'm not Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, so what are they talking about? I'm not rich. But upper 10% doesn't mean being a billionaire, of course. It means if we take 10 random people, you will be the richest out of them. 9 of them will be less rich than you. And I mean, him as a teacher and vice principal and a bureaucrat, you would just have to think, well, compared to, I don't know, the hairstylist or the bus driver or the cashier, I probably am more wealthy than those. And it's those kinds of people who, again, they are good, compassionate humanists, caring about the state of the world, but then they will mindlessly go onto a big cruise ship, not thinking about how much it ruins the climate. Or they will mindlessly board a plane and go on vacation to Namibia, which is what my aunt did recently, who also is rich because she's a now retired physician, also with her own house, even 2 houses. Uh, and this is, of course, something, I mean, flying in general in this unnecessarily flying into vacation in this day and age of the climate crisis is already enough to make you an evil person. Now, if you are, as a German, flying to Namibia of all places for your vacation, I find that kind of especially perverse. Um, but that's the point, that this part of society, um, these people, they have no self-reflection about their actual actions. Are we actually doing good in the world, or are we probably causing more harm than good? They just go, oh, I feel bad about people suffering, so that's enough to pat myself on the back and think that I'm a good person. And this also goes, Kant says, for the feeling of regret, which to him is a big delusion. It's a quite useless feeling to beat yourself up over having done something wrong. Um, Kant would say, if you did something wrong, try to make it right now. And the point is not, of course, you may have done something wrong and you may realize it later, and in an intellectual sense regret it. That is, tell yourself, oh, I shouldn't have done that. That is normal. I mean, I'm not pretending that I am completely holy, that I've never done wrong or bad or evil things. Surely I have done things in the past that I'm not proud of, that I would rather not have done, looking back. But I don't beat myself up over that. I don't feel bad about some things I might have done in the past every day, because what use is there? It's just self righteous. It's just showing to myself what a good person I am now because I'm feeling bad about my past evilness. No, all we can do, Kant would say, is actually learning from what we did and actually transforming ourselves and turning into better people. So Kant often talks about people on their deathbed when they are visited by the priest, which probably is not so relevant nowadays anymore. But back in Kant's day, of course, that was how it went, or how it was supposed to go, right? People were supposed to not just die randomly, but um, to be on their deathbed, and the priest would come and talk to them and give them the last sacrament. And the priests, of course, would try to get the people to feel regret for their past sins. They would, of course, tell them, this is your last chance to regret, and thereby maybe avoid hell that you otherwise might have earned for yourself. And Kant was against the priests pushing the people into feeling regret. He tells stories of people who, when they thought they were going to die, felt very regretful about their past sins and vices and misdeeds, and made great promises and oaths, saying, "Oh, dear God, if you let me live, if you save me from my illness, then I will turn my life around and I will be a different person. I will stop with the drinking or with the whoring or with the being greedy or whatever." And Kant says, it turns out very often when such people do miraculously get better and do keep living, that as soon as the sickness is not affecting them anymore, they forget their previous feeling, they forget their great oath, and they keep living just as sinfully as they lived before. And so Kant's advice is that the priest should tell people not to wallow in self-pity and in feelings of regret and tell themselves, oh, now I'm so regretful, so now I must have become a better person. But rather, the priest should tell people, do whatever you can still do to undo your bad deeds. Of course, not everything can be undone. Like if I killed a person, I cannot bring him back to life. Um, but let's say I once stole, or I once committed fraud and took money from someone, then it's really useless to now feel regretful and beat myself up over it. But rather, if I really turned into a better person, what I would really do is try to find that person whom I robbed or whom I tricked, and to give him back that money. That's what we should do. We should always try to do good actions, and we should always try to undo our bad actions if we can. And if we can't undo that specific bad action, we should at least try to do better next time. Of course, Kant does acknowledge that compassion leads not only to useless whining and not only to self righteously patting yourself on the back for being such a good person because you feel compassion, but rather that it can produce actual actions that the moral person would also do. But even here, he says that this has no real value, or that this is dangerous, because um, as a feeling, compassion is part of our sensuality. And as I explained in other lectures, sensuality to Kant means receptivity. We are sensual beings insofar as we receive impressions from something, insofar as we are affected by something, right? The intellectuality is spontaneity, the intellectuality is self-activeness, meaning we are intellectual when we ourselves bring forth something. So for our actions, that means when we determine our own actions, when we act morally because we thought and reflected about it and understood that this is a good action or this is an evil action. But we act sensually when we are somehow affected, when there's somehow some feeling being caused in us, and that feeling drives us to act in a certain way. And the issue with that is, since compassion is sensuality, therefore receptivity, it depends on whatever happens to fall into our senses. So Kant says that out of compassion, you might give money to someone poor, to someone in need, but if you base it only on compassion, you might actually give it to the person who doesn't need it the most. You will give the money to the person who only looks the most miserable, or who begs the loudest, who tells you, oh, please, I need it, I have a wife and children and a poor sick grandmother, while maybe you could have donated your money to a better cause. Maybe there are others need them who need your money much more, who are even more poor, but who are less vocal about it, or who look less miserable. Maybe precisely because they are better people who don't pretend, who don't shove it in other people's face like that. So in that sense, it is dangerous to be too affected by your sensuality. And also, if your actions depend on your sensuality, depend on whatever happens to affect you, well, compassion is probably not the only feeling you have. You can be affected by other feelings. Your feeling of compassion can end, or even if it keeps going, it can be overcome by a stronger feeling. So Kant says many have helped people, have given their aid or their money to people out of sympathy, and then they were taken advantage of. Then people tricked them, And because of that, the good-hearted person now makes his heart hard, now closes off his heart to others, now says, oh, that won't happen to me again. I will no longer be compassionate. I will no longer be tricked by someone looking miserable. And therefore, you will stop doing good deeds. Now, when you act on principles, this can't happen to you. You will probably say, okay, I should learn from my mistake. I helped the wrong person. I was taken advantage of. I need to be more careful. But still, it remains my duty to help other people in need. I just need to check who really is in need. But if you just acted on your feeling of compassion, now that other feeling of disappointment or even of anger at being tricked may make you stop acting in a good way. Or take a feeling like fear. Yeah, so let's say you live in the time of the Nazis and there's a Jewish person coming to you and asking you to hide him. Maybe you feel compassion. Maybe you would like to help him. But at the same time, you also have that other feeling of being afraid for your own life, and that feeling just happens to be stronger and to trump your compassion. Then you would turn that Jew away. You would probably feel bad about it, but you would still turn him away, selfishly saving your own life. While again, if you acted on principles, you would say, this is my duty, I have to do this. The problem to Kant is that to those who base morality on feelings, there is no duty. So I act morally if I feel like it, but since it is not an ought, it is not my duty that I have to do, I can always justify to myself making exceptions. I can always justify to myself not acting morally in a given situation when I'm not feeling like it. The fact that compassion belongs to our sensuality, our receptiveness, also means that it cannot possibly last, or that we cannot possibly feel it all the time. As Kant says, some people can easily be brought to tears, but nothing also dries as quickly as tears do. Because, again, intellectuality, thinking, means I'm self-active. I myself create something. So I can bring forth a thought, or when it comes to actions, I can form for myself a principle according to which I want to act. And then as long as I decide to, this stays the same. I can hold on to that thought. But I cannot possibly hold on to a feeling, because the feeling is caused from something else, not from me. I'm not autonomous, I'm heteronomous here. Think of the faculty of cognition for a moment and of the sensations you might have. Let's say you are eating something sweet. You will now taste the sweetness while you eat it. Maybe the sweetness will also linger in your mouth a little longer, but eventually it will be gone. You cannot possibly taste sweetness forever. You need, since it's essential, you need that actual affection. Something actually affecting you and influencing you and causing that sensation. And the same is true for compassion. So Kant would say we would need something that actually causes the compassion. We would need a specific image, but often we don't have that. And this is specifically an issue in the civil society, right? So Kant says that for savages, compassion might be enough for good actions, because there is not so much to do here. There aren't that many moral issues. Like maybe as a savage, you are on a hunting trip and you find another human being who fell down into some hole and broke his leg. And if you feel compassionate, you will pull him out and help him and not let him die down there. But Kant says in a society, in a developed society, it's not so easy anymore. Here you often don't see the evil. And Kant would say that in his day there are many princes, many kings who, on a personal level, are compassionate. Like if they ride through their city and they see a beggar who looks miserable, they may give him a lot of money. But at the same time, Kant says they start and organize wars as if they were hunting trips. Because here they don't see the suffering they cause. They could think about it, they could reflect on it, but they don't directly see the thousands that die pointlessly just because they started a war. And what has been true for Kant's days, for the society he lived in, has only become more true. The big evil is usually an evil which we can't directly see. This again leads us to Arendt's concept of the banality of evil, which is mainly just about mindlessness, about people thoughtlessly doing something and not thinking on what they are doing there. Like she mentions that Eichmann, who organized the Holocaust, was not without compassion. There was one single instance where he actually himself witnessed people being killed, where he was somewhere at the front and people were pushed into a hole that was dug up, and then the soldiers just took their guns and fired randomly into the hole full of people. And when Eichmann saw that, he couldn't look at it. He he felt sick, and he himself said that he couldn't see blood. He could never have been a physician because of that. But the thing is, as long as he sat on his desk and at his desk just filled out forms and just organized the whole logistics of the Holocaust, even though on an abstract level he knew what was happening, where those Jews that he was putting onto trains were going, he wasn't seeing their suffering directly, and so he didn't care. And the same, I think, is very much true today, right? Most people would probably not actively torch and burn a forest, but they have no problem stepping into a plane, even though on an abstract level they know full well that we are in a climate emergency and what flying by plane is doing. Or most people would probably not actively starve or take away the water from people in Africa. But that's not what they are thinking about when they are in the supermarket and buying some cornflakes from Nestle. Or most people would probably not actively enslave and exploit people and force children to work for them. But then they are shopping for new clothes without thinking about who probably made those clothes back in Bangladesh. So if you really, in this world and this society we built, if you really want to not just be friendly to your neighbor or whatever, but really want to do good or really want to refrain from bad, if you want to boycott companies or states that do evil, this cannot just be based on compassion. This must be based on you thinking about it and having firm principles. And again, those tears that can so easily be caused, they can also easily dry up. And I think we can see that in politics, if we consider the last few years, that a lot was based on feeling, and precisely for that reason didn't last. Like if I just reflect about the politics here in Germany over the last years, surely in other states it's a bit different. But here, for example, we had very huge climate protests when in 2019, when Greta Thunberg was at the height of fame and got lots of attention. There were thousands upon thousands, even millions of people striking for the climate, being affected in their feeling. But now, we recently, some months ago, had a federal election, and the polls before the election showed that over 90% of people were climate change deniers. Now, of course, most of those would reject that name. Most of those would claim they are not climate change deniers. But that's even worse than the actual conspiracy theorists and climate change deniers. Those people who pretend, even to themselves, to believe in climate change, but who actually don't. Because in the polls, people were asked what is the most important issue in this election, and the majority said it's immigration. And then I think the second place was economy, and then I think war with Muscovy, so security. And I mean, that's wrong, right? This is not a matter of opinion. This is a matter of scientific facts. If you believe that there's any issue that is more important in an election right now in the 21st century than the climate emergency, then whether you admit it to yourself or not, you are essentially a climate change denier. Because surely, whether one or two refugees that may come here are taken in or rejected, or whether one or two refugees that live here may stab someone, and even whether the economy grows or doesn't grow, or even whether there's a war here or not, all of that is just so insignificant in the face of the possibility of our whole civilization ending, of there not being a basis anymore for the life of so many people here on Earth, or even just here in this country. So the issue is that people just go by feelings, just go by what they are hearing on the news and the media, and this is of course fleeting. After a few weeks, after a few months, there's a new topic, and if they are just influenced by that, they can't hold on to a true conviction. Likewise, the refugee issue. So in 2015, when many refugees were coming here, we spoke about Willkommenskultur, so the culture of welcoming. I mean, to be sure, even back then there was a lot of racism here, and it was probably a minority that really welcomed refugees, but still, it was a sizable minority. There were people welcoming refugees at the train stations, applauding them. There were people going to refugee camps to teach German without being paid or anything, just as voluntary work. And of course, there are still certainly people doing that, but the numbers have dwindled. And nowadays, suddenly refugees have become the single biggest issue. Simply because, especially over the last year, there was a lot of reports about refugees stabbing people. But of course, refugees are not the biggest issue of Germany. They are not even amongst the top 10 issues. I mean, sure, one or two refugees may stab someone, and sure, that should be like any stabbing, whether by refugees or by native Germans, that should be prevented. The police should do something about that. But the fact of the matter is that our economy is going down. rents are going up to insane levels. No one can afford paying their rent anymore. Um, People will not be able to live when they are old. The whole retirement and pension system doesn't work anymore. It won't pay enough when they are old. There's of course the environment, the climate issue, again the single biggest issue. Um, there's the security threat that Moscow is posing. There's the war in Ukraine. Um, Even when you just look at people dying, I mean, people getting stabbed by refugees is not the main cause of dying. It just gets blown up in the media, but it really is not something that happens every day. What does happen every day is 8 people dying in traffic accidents. What does happen, not every, but every other day, is a woman dying because she gets killed by her ex or by her current partner. So clearly, this is not the main issue. Like, this is just not something you are allowed to have an opinion on. This is about facts. But if you are just affected by your sensuality, by whatever happens to fall into your senses, into your eyes or your ears, then as long as something is talked about a lot in the media and there are lots of talk shows addressing it and so on, and there's a lot of noise being made, then you will be influenced by it. Or last example, the war in Ukraine. At the start of the invasion, there was a lot of shock here in Germany, and there was a lot of solidarity. Again, people caring for refugees, people donating money, and so on. And now, however, that shock has, of course, vanished. We have gotten used to it. Okay, there's a war going on in Ukraine. That's just one of the things that happen in the world. And there's a lot of fatigue about it. There's a lot of people who just don't care anymore. And again, if you had firm principles in all these matters, you would say refugees have human rights. In fact, the right of the refugee, the right to belong to a community at all, as Hannah Arendt pointed out, is the most important human right of all. Because, as she said, as long as you belong to a state, even if you are a second class citizen, as long as you are a citizen, you have some basic rights and some basic measure of security, and you have the ability to fight for your rights. You can try to become an equal citizen and no longer a second class citizen. But if you are completely outside the system, if you don't belong to any community, to any state, if you are just superfluous, then you don't have any human rights. You don't even have the right to have rights, because that is what citizenship is. It is the right to have rights, and it gives you the ability to fight for your rights. And this is the big issue with refugees. This is, as Arendt described, this is what made the Holocaust possible, right? That is why in Western Europe, including even in Germany itself, only about 50% of Jews were killed. Now, only is relative. Of course, it's still a lot. Every second Jew being killed, but in Eastern Europe, it was 19 out of 20 Jews who got killed, not 1 out of 2. And that is because here in Poland and Ukraine, especially in Belarus, you had a complete breakdown of the state. Here you had people who were stateless, who didn't belong, who weren't German Jews or French Jews with some sort of citizenship, but who could very easily be killed off. Genocide to really work, it's hard. Even if you want to, even if you are the Nazis, it's hard to genocide your own citizens. What does work easily is genociding people who don't belong, who have no citizenship, who are stateless. Which, by the way, is exactly what we are seeing right now in Gaza, right? That is the big issue of the Palestinian question, that Palestinians have not even the right to have rights. That is why, even though there are certainly also many Israelis who would like to get rid of the Palestinians in Israel that have Israeli citizenship, those are much more safe. Those are much harder to get rid of. But those who are completely stateless, they were always in danger of genocide. If you studied, for example, Hannah Arendt, or also others who dealt with the Holocaust or with the colonial genocides in Africa or whatever, then you would have known that the danger was always there. So if you think about these things and if you reflect, then you know, you can have principles. You can say, okay, everyone needs to have the right to rights at all. Everyone needs to have a citizenship. Everyone needs to belong to a society. And just because you hear that one or two refugees have stabbed someone, or just because you hear that some Palestinians have committed a terror attack, even one as big as the one on the 7th of October, that will not make you forget your principles that everyone should have the right to rights. Likewise with Ukraine. If you just supported it based on shock, the shock will vanish eventually. But if you support it based on principles because you stand for international law and the rule of law instead of the rule of the jungle, because you stand with the invaded and never with the invader, or even just for pragmatic reasons, for God's sake, like as Timothy Snyder has pointed out, Ukraine is really fighting for us all. It's fighting for the West. It's fighting for Europe. We just have this relatively comfortable and still relatively free life because Ukraine still stands. It's funny, many years ago when there was the war in Afghanistan, some German politician famously said, our freedom, our liberty is defended at the Hindu Kush, which of course was a gross lie. There was no reason for our freedom to be defended in Afghanistan. We should not have been there. But nowadays, a politician would be much more justified to say, which is exactly why it is not said, because politicians usually only say lies and not obvious truths, but a politician would be just more justified nowadays to say our freedom is defended in Ukraine. So if you think, if you reflect, if you therefore have principles, then you will stand by them, even when a mere feeling has subsided because you're no longer affected in that same way. But if it is just the affection that makes you act in a certain manner, then your actions won't last. Again, the tears that are easily caused will also easily dry up. And the last criticism of the good heart or the morality based on the good heart is that not only can it lead to you just whining instead of doing anything, or just being self-righteous and thinking by whining, by feeling bad, you have already done enough, or not only can it lead to somewhat good actions, but good actions that may not last, or can lead to good actions that you stop doing because some other affection, some other feeling is stronger. No, lastly, Kant says the good heart can even lead to outright bad, to outright immoral actions. Because if you have a good heart, if you are compassionate, you can easily be swayed and you can be influenced and tricked by scammers, by frauds, Kant says. You will, for example, be swayed once again to, let's say, give your money to someone who looks especially miserable, even though maybe he's just pretending to be in need. And Kant gives the example several times of a judge who, according to him, should be just and not compassionate, which is not the same thing. Because if he has too much compassion, that may actually make him unjust. Because imagine someone who is rich has lent money to someone else, and now that other person has not given the money back in time, as the contract said, and now they go to court. This would be a very clear case. If the judge is just, he will say, you need to pay him back his money. It was not gifted, it was just lended. But if he is a compassionate judge, then that person might cry and act very miserably and say, oh, but I'm poor, I can barely get by, and I have poor children, please don't make me pay back the money, it will ruin me. And if the judge has a good heart, that heart might easily be affected, and that would cause him to say, okay, you don't have to pay back the money. But that would essentially mean that the judge is robbing the guy who originally lent the money, because it is his money. He deserves it back. That is what the contract said. Doesn't matter if the other person is more in need. It is still unjust to force that one guy to essentially gift away his money. And Kant says, which I think is a very nice remark, Kant says if the judge really wanted to be compassionate and to help the poor guy while also being just, then why not pay that money out of his own purse? Like, he could say, as a judge, I must rule that you have to pay back the money. But as a compassionate human being, I will pay it back myself from my own private money, so that the guy who lent the money gets his due, gets what is justly his, but you can also keep the money and don't need to ruin yourself over this. And this is not such an unrealistic scenario. Just as I was writing about this for my book on Kant, I had in my class one participant, because I give online classes on Aufklärung here in Germany, and I had one participant who told of an acquaintance she has, who had told her a story. He had seen some guy being robbed, I think on vacation, some guy standing in a queue, and someone had pulled out his money from his pocket. And that acquaintance had not done anything about it. He had clearly seen this guy being robbed, but he hadn't stepped in. And he justified that by saying, well, that guy, he looked well off. I think he didn't really need that money. And on the other hand, the thief, I'm sure he wouldn't have stolen if he hadn't needed it, if he hadn't been poor. So he probably needed that money more. And I can only say this acquaintance of my participant must be a completely evil person, rotten to the core. How dare he so self-righteously decide who needs the money more? It is simply wrong to steal. It is simply unjust. The money justly belongs to the person from whom it was stolen. And here you can easily apply the categorical imperative. as I talked about in the lecture on the moral law, the categorical imperative, um, which tells you that your maxim, according to which you are acting, should be fit to be a universal law that applies to everyone and according to which everyone is acting. So you would just have to ask this acquaintance of my participant, what if someone were stealing from you? What if someone were pulling your money out of your pocket? Um, and the third person would observe that. Would you want that third person to step in or not? And he probably would want that third person to step in. He probably would not want to be stolen from. But then, how can you decide for that other person um, that it is okay, that he doesn't need that money? And here, as Kant says about the judge, if this guy was really a good person and really believed that this thief was poor and in dire need of money and therefore forced to steal, then why didn't he step in and prevent the robbery but give the thief his own money? That way, he could have been both just and compassionate at the same time. But clearly, he didn't do that because he is not really a good person at all. What he said was probably not his real reason for not stepping in. It was probably just some later justification and rationalization. It was probably just not his compassion for the thief, but just his laziness and his lack of regard and reverence and of simple care for the person being stolen from. And besides, this example also very clearly shows how wrong and even how ridiculous any sort of consequentialism is. So, any sort of morality that tells you that you should look at the consequences of an action. Because you can see here that you never truly know the consequences. Like this guy told himself, oh, the letting the robbery happen will have better consequences than preventing it. The thief needs the money more, but really he couldn't know. Maybe the thief is poor and needs the money to survive and is forced to steal, sure, and maybe his victim is indeed rich and doesn't need that money. But also maybe the victim is actually poor. Maybe that was the last money which he had in his pocket, and now he has nothing. Maybe on the other hand, the thief doesn't need it. Maybe the thief will only use that money for drugs or whatever. You don't know that. So you should rather go with what you do know, and that is that stealing is wrong, and you should not let it happen if you see it happen and if you can prevent it. But that is Kant's point, that we can be swayed if we are basing our morality only on a feeling of compassion. We can be swayed to let something unjust, something immoral happen, or to even aid it, to even take part in it. And I said previously that he who has merely a good Gemüt, who is merely good natured and docile, will not stand up against evil because he has no strong drives, no strong inclinations for doing so. But it can also happen that he who is good-hearted will not stand up to evil. And in this case, not because he has no positive drives to do so, but he has probably actually negative drives that keep him from doing it because maybe he feels bad about stepping in. Like I know of people who feel bad about telling others of their mistakes, who feel bad about telling others you shouldn't do this. But sometimes this is necessary. This is a problem of this modern morality that we have, this slave morality, this morality of sensitivities that you mustn't hurt, of giving people their safe spaces, of not triggering people. Well, if your friend is getting addicted to drugs, taking the drugs away might hurt his sensitivities. It might trigger him. It might make him unhappy on the surface. But maybe it's the better thing to do rather than give him even more drugs to make him happy. If your friend is getting into a toxic relationship, maybe you should warn your friend that this relationship isn't good for them, even if they may not like to hear it. And I know people, however, who are too compassionate, who feel too bad about causing the slightest bit of discomfort to others, and therefore would rather let those others suffer way bigger discomfort. I know people who, to express it in a slightly extreme way, but I know some people where I have the feeling they would even refrain from telling a concentration camp guard, hey, what you are doing there is wrong, you should stop, just so they don't hurt that guard's feelings. So that is why Kant is not a fan of compassion or of a morality that is based on compassion. Now, to conclude this, the two ways of goodness that I talked about, the good Gemüt, the good mind or nature, or however you want to call it, and the good heart, they together make up the mode of our sensuality. While the good character, which I didn't address so far, makes up the mode of our thinking, Kant says. So he has these two words in German, Sinnesart and Denkungsart. And the word art means something like kind or species, but it can also mean the mode of something or the way of something. So Sinnesart would be the way of our sense, and Denkungsart would be the way of our thinking. And by both words, Kant means more or less what our current everyday language would call someone's character or someone's personality, but in a different sense. The Sinnesart, the way of the sense, or the sense mode, is our personality insofar as it was created by our nature. So something like our temperament, if someone by nature is more inclined to be open and extroverted, or to be more introverted, if someone by nature is more inclined to be very calm, or is more inclined to be easily agitated and to get angry easily. That is, Kant says, what nature makes of us. While the Denkungsart, the mode of thinking, the actual character, is our personality insofar as it hasn't been shaped by our nature, or maybe also by our socialization, but rather this is what we make of ourselves. And you could say that when it comes to the outside, when it comes to the actual actions that we do, he who has a good mode of the sense and he who has a good mode of thinking can look similar. It might even be hard in many situations to tell them apart, because their actions would be the exact same. Because if someone has both a good nature and a good heart, if their way of sense as a whole is good, then they will pretty much in many situations act as a morally good person should. Kant would say that the good natured, the docile person does not start conflicts, while the good-hearted person gets into other people's conflicts and tries to end them. So if you are both together, you act like a good person. For Kant, we have two types of duties. I will talk about those in more detail in a future lecture. One are the duties of justice or the duties of rights that are more negative, that are more about not hurting others' rights, so not killing, not stealing, not raping, and so on. And the others are the duties of virtue, the imperfect duties that are more positive, more about helping others in need. And you could probably say that if someone is good natured, then he has no strong drives to harm others' rights and to do unjust actions. While if someone is good-hearted, he does have strong drives to help others. And so, therefore, if you have both, if someone overall has a good mode of sense, that would mean that he usually does both his duties of right, his perfect duties, and his imperfect duties, the duties of virtue. And again, acts like a good person would, but not for the right reasons. Because the right reason should be not that nature doesn't compel you to harm others' rights or that nature does compel you to help others, but rather the right reason should be your own insight that this is the wrong thing to do and therefore you don't do it, and this is the right thing to do and therefore you do it. And therefore Kant says we can look at any sort of action and any sort of good action, any sort of action we should do, and it could have those two different sources. So an example he gives is if someone doesn't lie, if someone tells the truth, that can be, Kant says, honesty, or it can be righteousness. And mere honesty is not necessarily moral. It can be done for non-moral reasons. You can be honest simply because you're too naive and too simple-minded and not clever and sly enough to think of lying and tricking people. Or you can be honest because you have some feeling of personal honor that you don't want to hurt. On the other hand, true righteousness comes out of character, comes out of principles, comes out of us thinking, I understand that lying to others, that tricking others is wrong, that I shouldn't do it. So I live by the principle of always telling the truth. The person who just has a good mode of sense, who is just good, acting good because he is good-natured and good-hearted, Kant says, is like a painting made of watercolors. This is not true moral goodness. And again, such a person can even be brought to do bad, like with the good-natured Nero, who was influenced into becoming lustful and cruel, Kant says. On the other hand, the opposite is also possible. While Kant acknowledges that it may be hard and that it may happen rarely, he says it is possible to have a bad, an evil mode of sense. So to be bad-natured, bad-tempered, and also to be of a hard and cold heart. So to be someone who easily gets aggressive and attacks others, and someone who at the same time doesn't care about others suffering. It is possible to be such a person by your nature, but still through your reasons, through thinking, understand that you shouldn't follow this nature, understand that you should be better, and cultivate yourself to actually do act better. And here Kant too has a historical example, and that is Socrates. Um, Socrates, to him, was someone who, by his nature, was inclined to be a very bad person with lots of vices, but through his higher understanding, formed and shaped his own character. Kant likes to tell an ancient anecdote that existed even in antiquity about a physiognomer coming to Athens and checking out Socrates. And of course, there was the belief in the past, not just in antiquity, but way, way beyond it, way into Kant's own age. There was the belief in physiognomy, so in the study of the physiology of people, like how their face is shaped, and the belief that this could tell you what personality someone has, like that you can tell from someone's face whether they are honest or dishonest, whether they are more calm or more aggressive or whatever. Um, and this guy, who was supposed to be an expert at this, according to the anecdote, he came to Athens, and the pupils of Socrates, showed Socrates to him without him knowing that this was the great philosopher. And he said, looking at his face, "Oh, this is the vilest man I have ever seen. I've never seen someone with so many vices. He's so angry, so aggressive, so full of lust, so inclined to drinking. What a bad person this must be." And of course, the students laughed and said, "Oh, this shows that your art is worthless and that you are a charlatan. You're completely wrong. This is Socrates, the most virtuous person ever." But the master, Socrates himself, said, "No, no, he's right. He just studied my nature, like my natural inclinations. And by my nature, I really am inclined to be this person full of vices. It's just that I rule over my nature, that I applied my own reason and shaped myself, forced myself into a virtuous person." And this anecdote goes to show Kant's own position that while the mode of the sense may cause some outwardly good actions, and may make it easier to be good if you have a good mode of sense, or also may make it so that people who aren't truly good still act in a harmless or even in a helpful manner, and therefore still are somewhat good for society. Ultimately, it is not this mode of sense which matters. It is not your Gemüt, your nature, and not your heart which matters when it comes to morality, but rather it is your own rational insight. It is the principles you set for yourself. It is your character. So your thinking mode, your personality, not insofar as it was created and shaped by nature, but your personality insofar as you yourself created and shaped it. And I want to end illustrating this by one, I think, striking example. An example I take from an article in The Guardian by Omar Bartov. Omar Bartov is an Israeli historian of genocide, of the Holocaust, one of the leading experts in the subject, who for quite a while now, just like other experts in the subject, has been saying that yes, Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. Of course, this is the same issue as with the climate, right? We live in an age of Ausklärung where everyone thinks that his opinion is just as good as everyone else's, including the experts, and where people just spit on scholarship and spit on science and simply don't care what actual experts have to say. But in that article, Bartov talks about the current state of Israeli society, and he mentions leftist Israeli intellectual who, in an interview, talked about his own son who is living outside of Israel and who is for peace, who is criticizing the war crimes that Israel is committing. And this leftist guy says about his son, Offer says that for him every child is a child, no matter whether he is in Gaza or here. I don't feel like him. Our children here are more important to me. There is a shocking humanitarian disaster there. I understand that, but my heart is blocked and filled with our children and our hostages. There is no room in my heart for the children in Gaza, however shocking and terrifying it is, and even though I know that war is not the solution. I listen to Mao's Inon, who lost both his parents, murdered by Hamas on 7th of October, and who speaks so beautifully and persuasively about the need to look forward, that we need to bring hope and to want peace, because wars won't accomplish anything, and I agree with him. But I cannot find the strength in my heart, with all my leftist inclinations and love for humanity. I cannot. It is not just Hamas. It's all Gazans who agree that it's okay to kill Jewish children, that this is a worthy cause. With Germany there was reconciliation, but they apologized and paid reparations. And what will happen here? We too did terrible things, but nothing that comes close to what happened here on the 7th of October. It will be necessary to reconcile, but we need some distance. Now, this disgusting statement comes from an Israeli leftist, so you can imagine what those more to the center or even to the right are actually saying right now. It's of course disgusting for many reasons. It has what is typical for unaufklärdness in general, but what is especially typical for current Israeli society, and that is this complete egocentrism and this complete lack of any sort of self-reflection. Like, it's so jarring, you can grip it with your hands. He's talking about it's not just Hamas, it's all the people in Gaza who think it's okay to kill Jewish children, and that apparently justifies not caring about them being genocided. Well, if that justifies it, why wouldn't that also apply the other way around? What about all the Israelis who think it's okay to kill Palestinian and Arab children? I mean, they are talking about this in talk shows. They are talking about this on national TV, that even 4-year-old children are the enemy, even they will grow up to be terrorists, even they need to be killed. So why shouldn't a Palestinian then be equally justified to say, yeah, sure, we may have committed terrible crimes on 7th of October, but I don't care, I don't have it in my heart, it's not just the IGF, it's all the Israelis who think it's okay to kill children. I mean, including this guy that I just quoted, right? He may not say it as openly and as honestly as the Israeli right-wingers who just outright say, yeah, 4-year-old kids are the enemy, we need to slaughter them. But I mean, essentially what he is saying when he says, I don't agree with my son that every child is a child, our children are more important than their children. What this comes down to is he too is saying it's okay to kill Palestinian children. And he's saying this is at the same time as he is saying, oh, they think it's okay to kill our children. And he doesn't have, this is not some uneducated idiot, right? This is supposed to be an intellectual. He doesn't have the self-reflection to realize that he is doing precisely what he is accusing others of. And of course, the most disgusting part is the end, where he says, oh yeah, there will have to be reconciliation at some point, but first we need some distance. Well, I suppose there are maybe some Palestinians in Gaza who would also like first some distance before they reconcile and make peace. But they don't have the luxury to sit in a cafe in Tel Aviv while the bombs are falling some kilometers away and talk about how bad they are feeling and how they just can't bring themselves to let the other side in their hearts right now. They first need some distance, even though they know that they will have to reconcile. They don't have that luxury. But that aside, I didn't quote it to just talk about how disgusting and self righteous and lacking even the most fundamental basics of self reflection this statement is. No, my point is that he keeps talking about his heart being closed off, him having no place in his heart for the Palestinians. And see, this is my point. He says this is despite his leftist inclinations and love for humanity. This, I think, shows very well how little those leftist inclinations and this love for humanity are worth. If all your morality is just based on compassion, on love for humanity, it is always possible that something extreme happens. And I'm not denying that the 7th of October was extreme and traumatizing for Israelis. And I'm not denying that it was a massacre and a war crime, what happened there. But if you only base your morality on compassion, it only takes one extreme instance and you will forget all about it. You will throw it all overboard. And this is precisely why, or at least it's one of my reasons, I also have other reasons, why I always kept my distance to the left and why I disagree with the left and its morality. I have, of course, been accused in the past by right wingers to be a leftist. And to be sure, anyone who is not a complete asshole and scumbag will seem to be a leftist. I mean, the right wing position is usually just how can we possibly be the biggest assholes in any given position, whether it's about refugees or about the climate or about Ukraine or Gaza or about racism, about black people, about women. It's just how can we possibly be the biggest assholes and make life the hardest for others, and then that whatever that is our position now. That's usually what being right wing comes down to. So, of course, if you're not an asshole, you will often be confused for a left winger automatically. But one issue that I have with the left is its lack of principles, is that it is usually driven by this morality of sensitivities, by compassion, by empathy. And here, in this example, we can see that it doesn't hold. And I mean, the guy himself, right? He says that I know better. I agree with Enon, with what he says. It is beautiful. And I know that war is not a solution. And I know that we will have to reconcile. And I know that we too committed terrible crimes. I mean, the only wrong statement really is his claiming that what Hamas did was worse. Clearly, Israel committed much, much, much worse crimes. I mean, here you can go with the Holocaust survivor Gabor Mate, who has said that whatever you can accuse Hamas of, multiply it by 1,000 and you still won't have the crimes that Israel has committed. But that aside, the guy is generally right in what he's saying, right? But then he says, but still I don't have it in my heart. And I'm sorry, but this is just the most pathetic thing you can say. I prefer the right-wingers in Israel, who at least are more in unity with themselves, because they essentially say the same thing. I don't have it in my heart to care for the children of Gaza, but they at least don't feel bad about it. They think it's right and justified this way. So in that sense, they are more honest. With Kant, what we can reply to such a person is, okay, maybe you don't have it in your heart. After the 7th of October, this is even understandable from a psychological standpoint. But you are not just a psychological automaton. You are not just ruled and caused by how you are sensually affected. You are a rational being. And you yourself admit that you have rationality, that you have rational insight, that you can use your reason to think about what would be good and what would be evil. And you yourself admit that you understand what is happening right now is evil, and that the good thing to do would be something else. And yet you don't follow your own insight. You don't follow your own reason. You act irrationally. You let yourself be ruled by your feelings, and therefore you are not free. Right, here you can go back to my lecture on what is freedom and on free will. To Kant, freedom is not, as I explained there, doing whatever we desire, because we should question, where does this desire come from? Is it really my desire, or is it nature's desire in me? No, freedom is not doing whatever we may desire, but rather freedom is following our own concepts of good and evil. So thinking about what would be good and then being able to do what we understand to be good, even despite maybe not desiring it. That is true freedom. I explained there that even putting morality aside, even just from a pragmatic standpoint, you are a pathetic person if you say, I understand this is bad and still I do it. Like, if you smoke and say, I shouldn't smoke, and to be clear here, if you wanna, by all means, smoke. That's fine by me. But then you should embrace the fact that you are smoking. Then you should, as my dad would always tell smokers, being a smoker himself, if you are going to poison yourself, at least do it beautifully and with a clear conscience. You can smoke if you want to smoke, sure. You can also die early if you want to die early. I mean, maybe living the longest possible life is not the one thing we should go after. I mean, there's this joke, right, of this guy going to the physician and being asked, do you smoke, do you drink, do you have sex? No, no, no. And at the end, when he says how healthy he is living, he is asked, yeah, okay, but when are you being alive? When are you enjoying life? So, okay, by all means, smoke if you want to smoke. But then smoke because you want it. But if you're a person who says, oh, I should stop smoking, it is bad for me, and still keep smoking, then you are not free. Then you are being pulled by that desire instead of directing yourself, governing yourself through your own reasons, through your own rational insight. And the same is true here for this leftist. All his politics is just based on a feeling, on love for humanity. And so if someone turns that feeling off by hurting him somehow, like Hamas did, then suddenly he stops being this leftist. Suddenly he stops caring for humanity. This is pathetic. This is beneath the dignity of a rational being. And this is what Kant's morality is about. Have dignity. Have enough dignity to rule yourself and follow your own insight into what is good and evil. And I know that this is a very untimely thing to say. This is very much against the zeitgeist. And I know many who listen may probably find it too harsh or maybe also unrealistic. And many will probably claim, oh, this is just Venomism. You yourself also aren't better, and Kant also isn't better. If something really bad happened to you, then you would also forget your principles. like I know this from other discussions. For example, when you talk about the death penalty, and there are people who say, "Oh, there should be capital punishment for child rapists," then when you argue against them, they like to say, "Oh, you are against it now because you don't have children, or because nothing happened to your children. But if your child were raped, you would also forget all about that morality bullshit, and you would want that person to suffer and die." And the answer to that is, okay, maybe. I mean, who knows? Who really can know themselves well enough until they have been in that situation? And obviously, I don't wish neither on myself nor on anyone else to be in such a situation as to find out. So maybe me or Kant wouldn't follow our own moral principles always, and maybe nobody would. Maybe for every human person, there's some breaking point that he could probably reach. Maybe, but what does that matter? This is about what morality commands us to do, not what we actually will be doing. As I already said in the lecture on the foundation of morality, there is this naturalistic fallacy that starts from an is, saying the world is so and so, and from there tries to deduce a shall. Therefore, we ought to do this. So that would be saying, okay, everyone has some breaking point where he stops being moral. Therefore, it is okay to not be moral always. But that's a fallacy. If everyone has this breaking point and no one can be truly principled, it doesn't mean that Kant's morality is wrong. It means that something is wrong with us. It means that every single human is ultimately not good, but evil. Okay, maybe that can be your opinion, but that doesn't make this moral principle as such wrong. It just means that we all fail to reach that principle. But still, what Kant is saying is, and that I think no one can rationally disagree with, what Kant is saying is, your morality should not be a passive one. It should not be based on you being somehow affected. It should not be based on the nature that maybe luckily you have a good, a harmless, a helpful nature. It should not be based on fickle feelings that come and go and that can be influenced, that can be changed. So it should not be based on you having a good mode of sense. It should come from a good mode of thinking, from a good character. It should come from you reflecting on what would be good or evil, on what your duty is, and then following your own insights, on you shaping yourself independently of your nature, of your sensual nature, even against your sensual nature if need be, as Socrates did, and following your principles. And what that exactly might entail, what character, what the mode of thinking as opposed to the sense mode is, that I will address in the next lecture. My deep thanks be to my supporters, Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.